Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for joining me for another exhilarating session of OLC4O Term 2B, brought to you by Wausau Distance Education Center. My name is Mike Laverty. I'm the instructor for OLC4O this year, and today's date is Tuesday, May the 2nd, 2023. We are on class number 10 of our 35 classes together, so we're approaching 1/3 of the way through our classes together, and we're working our way through Unit 1. And I've mentioned a few times, Unit 1 is the longest one in terms of assignments. There's 18 to go over, so this one takes a little bit longer to go over, but there's lots of relevant information to cover, and just want to make sure that you're ready to tackle those writing assignments. So today we'll look at assignments 12 and 13, which have to do with you doing your first, I would say, major or longer writing assignment in this course. You're being asked to write a news report. So with that, let's keep on moving ahead. So some important dates. Keep in mind, this is week 3 of a 9-week course, and just keep those deadlines in top first and foremost in your mind. If you're a potential grad, if you'd like to graduate this year, if you want to be one of our 2023 graduates, then you have a June 9th deadline to have all your coursework submitted, have your final exam written. So that's coming up really quickly, a little over a month away. And if you're not a potential grad and you want to finish this course in Term 2B, you've got June 16th as your deadline. If you can't make those dates work, then you have to register for the summer term and complete your coursework over the summer. Please reach out to myself or the staff here at Wausau if you've got any questions about that, and I'll put up a number you can call momentarily. So yes, we are still working on Unit 1. That's weeks 1, 2, and 3. And then next week, week 4, we'll jump into Unit 2. OLC4O broadcasts live Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday from 1 p.m. to 1:50 p.m. Central Standard Time. You can phone us toll-free at 1-800-465-7144, or phone us locally at 1-807-737-4017. We are broadcasting locally at 91.9 FM and many other stations in the north. We can also be found on Bell ExpressVu, channel 972, and you can watch on the Zoom application. So if you've got Zoom on a phone or a tablet, you can just open up the Zoom app. Or if you're on a Chromebook or a computer of some kind, go to zoom.us, click the Join Now button, and enter my meeting ID, 417-6699-799. All of the classes are uploaded to YouTube. So if you're listening to this live on the radio and you have access to YouTube, you've got a reliable internet connection, you can search for Laverty Wausau and check out all of my videos on my YouTube channel. We can also send you a USB stick full of classes that you can watch on your own time. So we've got a few ways to make this work. You've just gotta reach out to someone at Wausau, and we can help you out with that, to help you out with getting you access to these courses. So please reach out to me through email. That's mlaverty@nnecschools.org. mlaverty@nnecschools.org. Please find me on Facebook, so you can add me as a friend on Facebook, or just send me a message on Messenger. I'm at Laverty Wausau, Laverty space WAHSA. Phone the Wausau office here in Sioux Lookout at 1-807-737-1488, or toll free at 1-800-667-3703. Or you can always reach out to your local learning center, and your local learning center can get you in touch with myself, or they can potentially answer some questions for you. And, the most important thing is you've just got to reach out. If you've got questions, you've got to ask somebody. And there's lots of people here to help you. All right, so here's today's lesson. We'll do our words of the day. We'll look at a headline. Our punctuation of the day is the ellipsis. That's the ... more commonly known as the ... Parts of speech, we'll look at conjunctions, and then we'll look at assignments 12 and 13. Your learning goals are to learn how to use conjunctions and ellipsis points. Don't think we'll have time for this one. And we'll take notes as we your learning goal is to take notes as we review assignments 12 and 13 from Unit 1, Lesson 3. Your success criteria is to practice using conjunctions and ellipsis points in your writing assignments. So, it's one thing to learn about these parts of speech and these grammatical conventions and all that, but the best thing is to use them in your own writing. Use the steps outlined in today's lesson to complete assignments 12 to 13 from Unit 1, Lesson 3. So try to use these things in your writing, and don't worry about getting everything perfect. If you make a mistake, that's what I'm here for. I will, when I hand your work back to you, I will give you some suggestions and kind of guide you as you progress as a writer. And that's what this course is all about, is you progressing as a reader and a writer, building on your literacy skills. So here is our clue as to the word of the day. So I've got the Wawate News. That's their banner image on their website and on their newspaper. We've got a broadcast tower, and we have the Wassa Distance Education Center logo, which of course is a distance education broadcaster. So our Anishinaabe-Moan word of the day is Bidi Majimo. That's a verb for she or he brings the news. An English synonym. So remember yesterday we talked about synonyms. So an English together word is broadcast, which is to transmit programs from a radio or a television station, to speak, perform, sponsor, or present on a radio or a television program. So that's what we're doing here. We're broadcasting live on the airwaves, and then we, in a similar sense, we broadcast on YouTube. Also wanted to introduce some new words and some new concepts as we progress through this course, because that's what literacy is all about, being introduced to new ideas and new forms, whether they be dance, art, poetry, songs, right? That's what literacy is all about. It's just, learning about new things and building upon your previous knowledge and your previous skills. A neologism is a newly coined word or expression. So neo or neos is a Greek word that means young, fresh, new, or recent. Logos is a Greek word that means word, reason, or plan. Ism. So there's lots of isms in the word, right? Like socialism and struggling for another one. Oh my God, I can't think of communism, socialism. You've got all kinds of isms. So it's a Greek prefix that shows a word represents a specific practice, a system, or a philosophy. The English word logic comes from logos. Pacifism, right? The art of peacekeeping. There we go. So we've got altruism, which means caring for others. Ultra means others. Pacifism means practicing nonviolence. So Pacific means to be peaceful. The Pacific Ocean is not a very peaceful ocean. It's kind of one of the most misnamed things in the world. But pacifism is practicing nonviolence. Narcissism means being self-obsessed, obsessed with you, obsessed with your own self. Narcissist was a character from Greek mythology who was self-obsessed, and he drowned trying to embrace his own reflection. A similar concept is a portmanteau. This is a word that's a blending of the sounds and combining the meanings of two others. So podcast was originally from the iPod, which was like, before we had iPhones, we had iPods, and you could put tons of music on them. So you combine iPod and broadcast, and you get podcast. Breakfast and lunch. You combine breakfast and lunch, you get a brunch. And the word portmanteau itself is a portmanteau. It comes from the word port, which means to carry. and the French word manteau, which means cloak. So a portmanteau is like a cloak or a wardrobe that you can carry around. I love origins. I love looking at the origins of words. This is known as etymology, not to be confused with entomology, the study of insects, but etymology, etymology, is the study of word origins, so where words come from. Here's some Anishinaabe-Moan words. We've got Mazinaigan, which is a book, a letter, a document, a paper. Baba Majimo, she or he spreads the news about. And then when we combine these two words, Baba Majimo Mazaniagan is a newspaper. So when you combine the verb of spreading the news with the noun a document, so a newspaper is, spreading the word through a document. All right, which brings us to our newspaper article of the day. So this is, of course, published in the Globe and Mail. This is published in a physical newspaper, and it's also published on their online newspaper. So the Globe and Mail does both, okay? It does both. Okay, so here's our article of the day. Women are posed to make up 50% of federally appointed judges in Canada. So very important just to review our parts of the headline as we're talking about headlines. Sorry, of the article. So we got a headline. We got a byline. The byline is who wrote it. In this case, it's Sean Fine. He's a justice writer. And this was published April 7th, 2023, and was updated April 8th, 2023. We've got a caption. And the caption tells us about this photograph, right? So even though this story was published on April 7th, we've actually got a photograph from the 80s. So this is Justice Bertha Wilson, and she was the first female Supreme Court appointee, right? So she's our first female Supreme Court, so the highest level of justice in Canada. So she was the first female one, and this is back in 1982, and that is courtesy of the Canadian Press. That's the photo credit. So we have to give credit where credit's due. We have to say where did that picture come from? So there's our headline. Women are poised to make up 50% of federally appointed judges in Canada. Quickly look at our parts of speech. So women is a noun, right? It's a thing. It's a group of people. Are poised. So poised is a verb. Are is an auxiliary verb. The word auxiliary means to help. Auxiliary forces in the military are helper forces. So they are poised to, remember prepositions are words like to, for. They tell us relationships. They tell us if something is underneath, beside. They tell us when something happened, during, after. So women are poised to make up 50%. 50% is, of course, a noun. It's a thing. Of federally appointed. So appointed is a verb, right? So and then the adverb tells us, how they're appointed. In this case, they're appointed by the federal government. Federally appointed judges in Canada. So again, in is a preposition. It tells us where something happens, in this case, in the noun Canada. And Canada is, of course, a proper noun, so it should always be capitalized. Capital C-A-N-A-D-A. So I don't have too much time, but I want to just read you the article, a little bit of it. So I wonder if oops. Yeah, I think I had I may have cut off the first part of the headline there, or the first part of the article. But this article follows a similar pattern as we've seen in the articles we've looked at previous in this course. And the main thing I want to emphasize here is that your lead paragraph, it's basically restating the headline. It's restating the headline. and might add a bit more information, but you open with the lead. It opens with the lead article, right? It opens with the lead idea, what the article is about. What and who the article is about, and then from there we get more information about that story. So we get the most crucial, essential information that our readers have to have right now, and then everything else that follows is of lesser importance. So that's a big criteria that I want you to keep in mind as you write your news report, right? The information that comes after the headline and the lead paragraph is of lesser importance. It's not that it doesn't need to be in there, but you have to approach it like, if the reader only read my first paragraph, I have to put as much crucial information in there as possible. And then, once I've introduced that main idea, I can then expand upon it and add more information and add some quotes from people in the article, but I have to get the most important stuff out of the way first, right? So I chose this article because, our novel Jimmy Comes Home is about justice, and I just wanted to have a discussion about, justice in Canada and justice for Jimmy, and we'll talk about the concept of restorative justice as we explore the novel Jimmy Comes Home, because that's really what's happening with Jimmy. He's gone to a juvenile detention center, and I think they're trying to avoid him going to jail, like an actual penitentiary or an actual institution. So they want to give him some restorative justice, and that is restorative justice is when you plug somebody back into the community, and sometimes it involves making apologies and volunteering and just trying to give back to your community, and sort of like, it's got a much more positive slant to it, right? So instead of isolating someone and putting them in a cell and subjecting them to, the awful things that can happen in a prison, you keep that person in a community, but they have to sort of give back, and they have conditions, right? And they may have to attend like a healing circle or something like that to sort of get their lives back on track and to figure out what they need to do with their life. All right, so our part of speech of the day is the conjunction. So a conjunction links other words, phrases, or clauses together. Conjunctions let us avoid choppy sentences, but we must use them correctly to do so. So there's a conjunction right there, the word but. So a conjunction, when I was a kid, I remember seeing the Schoolhouse Rock video, conjunction, junction, what's your function? And they use the metaphor of a train, right? And so the different parts of the train are coupled together with these conjunctions, right? And so conjunctions are joining words or phrases or clauses, and they help us piece together our sentences. There's an acronym or a mnemonic device. Pneuma is mind, right? So it's a mind device. So fanboys, so Fanboys, right? So and these are I wouldn't say that, well, they're among the most common conjunctions we use in the English language. So for, and, nor, but, or, yet, and so. And when we use those coordinated conjunctions, they always come with a comma. We have correlative conjunctions, so either or. So either I'm going to pass this course or I'm not. Not only, but also, neither, nor, I didn't, or, both, and. So they come in pairs. There's subordinated conjunctions like because, since, as, although, though, while, whereas, until, after, before. You can either call me at home tonight or wait until tomorrow. Not only do I have a phone for a call, but I also have a case and charger available. Not for call, for sale. Not only do I have a phone for sale, but I also have the case and charger available. We will order both the large pizza and the hot wings. So they come in pairs, right? You can't have one without the other. You left the door open and the dog ran away. You left the door open, so the dog ran away. You left the door open, yet the dog ran away. So you get many different meanings depending on which conjunction you use. So if I say you left the door open and the dog ran away, it's sort of like this thing happened and then that thing happened. But if I say you left the door open, so the dog ran away, it's like I'm definitely kind of blaming you for what happened. The exam was difficult, yet many students passed. The exam was difficult and many students passed. The exam was difficult, so many students passed, right? The last one doesn't really make a lot of sense. So you got to be careful with which conjunction you choose, because it puts a different slant, puts a different angle or spin on what you're trying to say. Most people in my family work in healthcare, comma, whereas I decided to go into education. I need an umbrella because it is raining. So you've got two concepts. I need an umbrella. It is raining. So I need an umbrella because it is raining. So the word because joins those two groups of sentences together. And our punctuation of the day is the ellipsis point, or known as the dot, dot, dot. 3 equally spaced points, dots or periods, that are most commonly used to show when a word or words have been taken out of a quotation. They are also used to show when a writer trails off, stutters, or leaves the reader in suspense. Ellipsis is from the ancient Greek for leave out. The plural form is ellipses. So you can impress people with your knowledge of the English language, right? Most people just know it as the dot, 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 but now you know it as the ellipsis. So what I've done here is I've given you an excerpt, a short passage from one of my favorite books, Natalie Goldman's book, Writing Down the Bones, Freeing the Writer Within. And in that quote, she says, quote, "We must continue to work the compost pile, enriching it and making it fertile so that something beautiful may bloom, and so that our writing muscles are in good shape to ride the universe when it moves through us." So I love that quote. In this case, she's talking about keeping a notebook and keeping a diary and just writing stuff down and not worrying about it making sense. It's kind of, she's where I got the idea of free writing. So it's like we need to just write stuff down, and we need to just put things on the page, and then later we can come back to it, and we have to practice our muscles, so when the universe rides through us, we are ready to capture that magic. So let's say I wanted to quote this in an essay. I could say, in her popular book, comma, Writing Down the Bones. Now, when you bring up the title of a book, you put italics. So italics are for book titles. Natalie Goldman offers new writers excellent advice on generating ideas. Quote, "We must continue to work the compost pile, dot, 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 so that something beautiful may bloom." So the dot, dot, dot here, the ellipsis, indicates to the reader that I have taken things out. I have cut them out of her quotation. Now, when you do that, it's important that you don't change the meaning of what the author was trying to say, because that is a danger. You can distort what they're trying to say if you cut out part of what they're saying. And then often, journalists will go and interview someone for a story. They'll interview someone for a newspaper story, and the person will talk for 5-10 minutes, and they're not going to be able to publish everything the person said, so they have to cut out some words, and that's where you would use the ellipsis. And then the other way we use it is when someone is trailing off, when someone is stuttering, when they're having difficulty speaking. This would be used in fiction. So, Here's an example. On his first day of teaching grade 1, Mr. Lance cleared his throat and spoke to his class. I hope we, all, have a good day. So that's where he's clearing his throat and struggling to speak. After all this family has been through, they may have more to endure, So that's sort of like to be continued or setting up suspense. I waited for you in the parking lot for almost half an hour, Right? So often when you text somebody and then you put that ... it's like, yeah, I was there waiting for you, ... It sort of shows that you're sort of waiting for them to say something, or that you're mad at them, or something like that, right? So so we use it to set up suspense, or to say that there's more to come later, or to indicate where someone is stuttering. And then we usually see this in fiction writing, but it's also used in nonfiction writing, right? So fiction being short stories and novels and things that didn't actually happen, and that are written in fictionalized accounts. And then nonfiction is reporting in newspapers and books about subjects, and encyclopedias and website articles on real things. Okay. So that brings us to our discussion of assignment 12. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to read the assignment guidelines, and then I'm going to go back and I'm going to have a look at the example that you've been given to study off of from the textbook, or from your unit handout. So for assignment 12, you have to choose a topic for your news report. And for this particular assignment, you will use any of the events you thought were newsworthy in Chapter 1 of Jimmy Comes Home. You will have to make up some details, but you should use any information provided by the novel to come up with your answers to your 5 W's and your how. So the who, what, where, when, and why, and the how. Your topic will become your headline. You can use juvenile offender back in town as your headline, or you can choose something else. So that's an easy 2 marks if you just simply want to write down juvenile offender back in town, or you can come up with your own headline. It's totally up to you. So you choose a headline, and then you create a photograph. So a photograph to go along with your story, to visually show the event being reported on. So you can draw a picture, or you can locate a photo or other graphic in a magazine or newspaper or from the internet that would appear with your news report. Okay, so you can find a photograph on the internet just by doing a Google search, or you can draw something, right? So totally up to you. And this isn't an art class, so I'm not going to grade you on your artistic abilities, but if you do choose to draw something, whatever you draw has to be relevant to the story that you're talking about in your newspaper article, right? So it's just got to be consistent, right? So if you're writing about Jimmy coming home and him being a juvenile offender and returning to Green Star Lake, so don't draw me a picture of a dolphin or a cheeseburger, right? I'm just thinking about my 2 young boys at home and their silliness. But you have to find an image that visually shows the event. And then you got to figure out what details you're going to include. So you may have to make up some of the details, or you can just strictly go upon what happens in the textbook, okay? Your report will have at least 1 quotation from somebody in the story, and quotation marks will be used to identify it or them, the person in the story. So for example, Jimmy's grandma commented, quote, "I'm so happy that you're home again, Jimmy." And then you are to write a rough copy of your news report. It must be 1 page in length, handwritten. So you can do this 2 ways. So it can be handwritten, or or a printed copy. Slash, a Word document. It's up to you. A Word doc or a Google doc. So don't worry about the fine details, spelling, grammar, and punctuation. Right now, you will take care of that when you're preparing for your final copy, which is assignment 13. So I just want to mention that for these first couple of assignments, I'm pretty lenient with your spelling and your grammar and your punctuation. The main thing I want you to do is just to get things down on the page. I just want you to start writing things and producing content. That's the most important thing, is just to get your ideas on the page. My job as your instructor is to give you some feedback and some guidance and to be like, okay, what you're doing here works, but you may want to work on this, and you may want to change this. And that's a lot of what I do. Like, if you spell a word wrong, I will cross it off and give you the correct spelling. But some of the times I'm just giving you a suggestion. Like, I think this sentence would work better if you said it like this, right? So that's how you learn as a writer, right? You have somebody correct what you've done, and that's how you learn, right? And so you write, and then somebody else edits your work, and then you go back and change what you wrote. And then I think the next step would be for you to edit. So you need to become an editor, right? So that's a really important thing for you to develop in this course. You have to find ways to edit your own work. But for now, especially if you're just in the beginning phases, just worry about putting stuff on the page and getting some feedback later. So for now, just focus on getting your story on the paper using the inverted pyramid structure. So we talked about the inverted pyramid yesterday. And the inverted pyramid is when you give the most important information first, and then you go back. And then you give the reader the less important details, right? So it's not that these details shouldn't be in the article, but you want to include the most important stuff first, and then everything else should be most important to least important. So don't put something essential to the story in the last paragraph. Your last paragraph should be, something that's nice to know, but I don't have to know it. And so just briefly, if we look at the article in the textbook or in your unit handout, the headline reads, City's third bus fatality, Ottawa, July 27th. Should be a year there. Let's just say 2021. Newspaper articles need dates, and they should have a day, month, and year. Yesterday afternoon, a pedestrian identified today as Joe Johns was fatally struck by a bus while crossing Bank Street near Walkley Road. He was running with an iPod when the accident happened. Okay, so that's my lead paragraph, okay? Now, the where of the story is capitalized there, while crossing Bank Street near Walkley Road, right? So we know what happened in Ottawa, and then we get a more specific location. So that's my lead paragraph. So that's the most important piece of information is the tragic fact that a city bus has struck down a pedestrian, right? So that's what you need to know. That's absolutely essential. That has to be included in your lead paragraph. That's what happened. Then you get some additional information. Michael Andrews, an off-duty police officer, was first on the scene. Andrews reports, quote, I gave him first aid and emergency teams arrived here quickly. Unfortunately, we were unable to revive Joe Johns. It is believed that he died on impact. Witnesses were left in shock following the accident. Amy Anstey was driving east on Walkley when she witnessed the accident firsthand. Quote, I will remember that for the rest of my life, she sobbed. I felt helpless as I watched him run unknowingly into traffic. Okay, so we're getting, the quotes from the people in the story are doing two things, right? They're telling us things that people actually saw, and the things that the people actually saw are explaining the story, right? So we hear that he was hit by a vehicle, there was an off-duty police officer who tried to help him, and then the first responders arrived and they weren't able to revive him. And then we get some more information. So it's nice to know that he was a single father of 2 teenage girls and he lives in the Alta Vista area. And that people are coming forward on Facebook to give their condolences and to honor his life. But that's not as important as knowing that he was fatally struck by a bus, right? Then we learn that the bank street was closed for 2 hours as officers investigated the accident. It appears the city bus driver had followed all traffic regulations and that Johns had tragically run into traffic. So there we go. So that's how the news report works. Headline, image, lead paragraph, several more paragraphs, and then a concluding paragraph. So you need to write your paragraph, okay? And very important to note that there's a checklist you can follow, and I'm just seeing how much time we have today. We may have to look at the checklist tomorrow. This is a really important assignment, though, so I want to take our time going through it and giving you as much information about it as possible. So because you will be writing 2 news reports in this course, and you'll be doing multiple drafts of them, right? So at some point you'll be doing your own news report, and that you can choose the topic on, and then you'll be revising it for your literacy portfolio, which is the last thing you do in this course. So very important that you learn to write a news report and to understand how it's written. So this one is you are writing about chapter 1 of the novel Jimmy Comes Home, right? So we've got chapter 1 of Jimmy Comes Home. So what I'm going to do now is we're going to look at chapter 1 together, and I'll read it out, and then it'll help give you to sort of jog your memory, and we'll review it. We'll jog your memory on chapter 1. If you haven't already read it, now's a perfect chance to review yourself with it. So the first chapter of Jimmy Comes Home, chapter 1, is simply titled Coming Home. Very appropriate. Coming Home. Remember I said that we put the titles of novels in italics. We put shorter things like chapter headings, chapter titles, songs, magazine articles. So shorter works go in quotation marks. All right, so I've already read the first paragraph of this chapter, and in the first paragraph, Jimmy is he lands on the airstrip. He's back in Green Star Lake. We learned that he broke into the band office looking for money. He tried to burn it down. He had many offenses in several months. He's been a troubled youth. He's had assault charges, drinking offenses from the time he was a very little boy. And his community doesn't know what to do with him, so they sent him to juvenile hall, right? And many people in the community were happy to see him go. They were relieved to see him go because he either assaulted them or had done awful things or said awful things to him. So now these people are relieved, maybe not so relieved that he's back. But Jimmy's grandmother is very happy, and she's crying at the airport. And then Jimmy is talking to Frank, his probation officer, right? And he's kind of telling Jimmy, it's time to go, Jimmy. Everything's going to be okay. But Jimmy looked out the window and saw a band constable and an RCMP officer waiting in front of the plane. They're always here now, searching for drugs and alcohol. They're searching everybody's bags now, every flight. That's what Frank said. So they're going to be searching me? Is that it? Said Jimmy. Well, the PO looked at, so remember Frank is his probation officer. Well, the PO looked at Jimmy levelly. They're going to go through your bags for sure. I don't know about searching you. No bloody way they're searching my body. I just left Jupy 4 hours ago. How could I have anything on me? That's stupid. No way they're searching me. No way. Frank knew that Jimmy had been nervous on the trip, and now he was about to explode. Let's take it easy. You don't want to go down there and get into a big fight your first day back. That's just going to make things tough for you. Jimmy shook his head. I don't care. I'm not putting up with that bullshit, he yelled. One of the two pilots called out from the front of the plane. "Are you getting off here?" "No," Jimmy yelled at him. "Just give us a minute, please, will you?" Frank asked. The pilot got off the plane and went to speak with the RCMP officer. "What did we talk about before you got on the plane?" Frank said quietly. Jimmy said nothing. "Well, what?" Frank asked again. Then he backed away, letting Jimmy cool off. "Look, I've got to see 4 or 5 people this afternoon, then the chief and counsel." Jimmy stopped him. "I bet the chief will be happy to see me, eh?" "Well, you don't know yet, do you?" "I know. I'd rather be back in jail." Frank spoke up again. "What I was going to say was, when I'm gone, I'd like you to go back to your grandma's house. Do you want me to go with you?" "No, why would I need you?" Frank nodded. "Okay, are you ready to go now?" Jimmy sat as if he were glued to the seat. Then he calmed himself. "Yeah, okay, let's go," he told Frank. "Don't worry, I'll be cool." Frank believed him. Having known Jimmy over the previous 6 months, he'd come to realize that he kept his word. Even when Jimmy had told Frank that he was going to punch out a young guy from a different community who was harassing him, he'd been telling the truth. In the end, both Jimmy and the other guy had been taken to the hospital. When Jimmy got to the bottom of the stairs coming off the plane, one of the band constables came over to him. Jimmy waited for what might come next, but the constable, Fred, smiled at him. "Hey, Jimmy," Fred said, and shook his hand. "Welcome back." Fred and the RCMP officer, who was new to the community, didn't even search his bags, and that surprised him. Frank turned to him. "Okay, Fred is taking me over to the band office. I'll see you up at your grandma's house in a couple hours. Hang around till I get there because I want us to go to your school together. Do you want to ride over to your grandma's?" "Nah, I'd rather walk." "Okay, I'll see you later." Frank drove away with Fred and the other officer, and Jimmy was alone. When he began to walk toward the open gate in the fence that circled the airport, though, he saw Gary and 4 of his friends waiting on the other side. All right, so what we're doing here is we're looking at some key events, okay? So key event number 1 is Jimmy lands on the airstrip. I'm writing in point form, right? He has a conversation. He has a conversation with Frank. Frank, that's his parole officer, his PO. You know, then he finally gets off the plane to walk to his grandma's house. Right, so I misspoke earlier. So Jimmy's grandmother is not, she's not at the airport, but she did cry knowing when that he was going to come back. She's very emotional about him coming back. All right, so that's the first part of the story. You know, there's you know, we got an RCMP and band constable, Fred, are there to greet Jimmy. Okay, and then Jimmy sees his friend Gary. "Good to finally see you," Gary told him. "It's been a long time." Whoops. "Yeah, 18 months. I guess so. How you been?" "Good, good. Where are you going now?" "To my grandma's. I got to go there for my PO, and then we got to go over to the school." Gary and his friends began to laugh. "School? You going back to school? I doubt that they're going to let you back in the building. They'll probably think you're just going to burn it down like you did with the band office. School? What a joke. You hardly ever used to go when you were 12, and they think you're going to go now? That's good." "I got no choice," Jimmy told him. "I don't go to school. I go back to juvie." "What am I going to do, Gary? Refuse?" He stared at his best friend. "Nah, I guess not." "You want me to walk over with you?" Jimmy shook his head. "I'll talk to you later." "Okay, I'll come and see you after your probation officer leaves." "Sure," said Jimmy. Sure. Gary and his friends left, and Jimmy walked towards his grandma's place. On the way there, some young people waved at him, but others just stared as he walked by their houses. A couple of young kids came up on their bikes and asked him, "Are you going to stay here or go away again, Jimmy?" He kept walking and didn't want to answer, but they kept asking. He looked and looked. He laughed and looked at one of the girls. "I'll be here for a while, Crystal." "Are you going to burn anything this time?" He didn't laugh at that. He ignored the kids for a while and kept on walking, but they rode behind him, still asking questions. Finally, he turned and stared them down. They took off on their bikes. So, you know, the second main point here is Jimmy talks to Gary. Then, you know, some kids make fun of him. And that's a very important detail, right? So you got to like put yourself in Jimmy's shoes and just think how embarrassing it would be to have these little kids making fun of you and asking you if you're going to burn stuff, and it's going to be very traumatic for him, right? As Jimmy walked, he thought about Gary. What he remembered were the fun times they used to have, hunting and racing across the lake on their snow machines. Gary had been his best friend for a long time. He didn't want to think about the drugs, the alcohol, the gas sniffing that had been part of their friendship, but he knew that that was the first thing Gary was going to talk about when he came over. He could tell from looking at Gary at the airport that he'd been on something this afternoon. It could be anything with Gary, because Gary had nearly always been on something from the time they were kids. First gas, then homebrew, and then drugs. Jimmy had never been far behind. Buddies. That's how he had come to break into the band office and start the fire. He had gone to school that day and landed in a fight in gym class, then the principal's office, and then suspension for a week. At the time, he'd figured it made no difference. He'd only been to school 2 days that month. That night, he'd been walking out of the bush in the middle of the night on the way home. He'd been out with Gary, but they'd gone their separate ways, and Jimmy had broken into the band office looking for money from bingo. When he couldn't find anything, he lost his temper. He started to kick in the office equipment and the computers and throw anything he could get his hands on across the room. Then he lit a fire. Gary had appeared at the doorway in the middle of his rage. "Jimmy, we got to get out of here before the cops get here," he shouted. Jimmy had continued to toss things around the office, and finally Gary grabbed him by the arm and dragged him out of the building. He had been screaming at Gary when the RCMP and the band constables had pulled up. Okay, so there we go. Jimmy remembers his troubled past. So we got lots of great details that you can use for your newspaper article. And finally, the last part. Jimmy finally gets home, and home for now is his grandmother's house, right? When he got to his grandma's house, he saw his Arctic Cat snow machine sitting next to the house, and his heart leapt. He'd put his bags down and sat on the black leather seat. The sun had been shining on the machine, and the leather was warm. He leaned over and breathed it in. It smelt good. He felt good. He leaned back and put his head down on the back of the seat and took in the good feeling. He thought about all the times he'd fallen asleep in detention, dreaming about being back on his Arctic Cat. He heard his grandmother come out of the house and walk over to him. She ruffled his hair. "Jimmy, I'm so glad to see you." He smiled up at her and let her hold him. Martha spoke as though she didn't want to let go. "I'm making your favorite today, moose stew and blueberry pie." He smiled and again, surprised. "Where'd you get moose from?" "Your uncle. He still had some frozen." Jimmy had gone over a year without moose meat. His grandma picked up his bag and waited for him to come inside with her. "I'll be there in a minute." "Okay." She went inside. He bent down and put his face against the body of the snowmobile, again taking in the smell of the machine in the warm sun. He knew that in a couple of months he'd be headed out across the snow. Okay? So Jimmy arrives and sees his grandma. So what you're doing here is you're writing you're writing the news report, and if we when we're writing our news report on on chapter 1, and if we use that headline, juvenile offender juvenile offender back in town. So if that's going to be my headline, then I need to use that inverted pyramid format. And maybe we'll close with that for today's lesson. So we're going to have a lead paragraph. Lead paragraph. And then maybe a quote from someone in the story or the chapter, right? Then I'm going to have some explanation on, why he left, and then, how he came back. And then I'm going to close things off with some additional info. So that's basically how you're going to structure this thing. You're going to write your headline. You're going to have a lead paragraph. You're going to include a quote from somebody in the story. You're going to explain why he left, how he came back, and then close off your news report with some additional info about Jimmy and his return to the community. Okay, and that is that's assignment 12, right? So assignment 12 is the rough copy. Let's just before we close today. Yeah, assignment 12 is your rough copy. And then in tomorrow's class, we'll talk about this checklist that's in the unit handout. So we'll talk about the checklist and see some important information that you need to include in your rough copy. And then we'll have a discussion about assignment 13, which is you writing your final copy of the assignment. And then maybe we'll talk about the writing process and how you're going to go about getting your rough copy into kind of shape and making it better. So that's all the time we have for today. Thank you for tuning in.